Hi, everybody. I'm Kurt Roney, Professor of Strategic Management here at the University of Mount Olive, just south of Raleigh, North Carolina. And tonight, we're going to be hearing from a team of MBA students who are just about to receive their MBA degrees. And one requirement that they must fulfill before they receive their degrees is to complete this presentation of a strategic assessment that they've done. And the assessment and the team members will be introduced by the team leader, Scotty, what's your last name?
Deal.
Huh?
Deal.
Okay, and so Scotty, I'll turn it over to you and you can introduce your team leaders.
Okay, thank you, sir. First off, let me say how proud I am to be part of such an awesome team, such a hard-working team, and they truly are. Those team members are Linda Weeks, Richard Jackson, and Jared Hill. And we'll start our presentation tonight by discussing Caterpillar's history and background. And Jared, I think you have this honor.
Yes, sir, I do.
And what I need to do is get your PowerPoint slides up here. There we go. Jared, go right ahead.
Yes, sir. You can take us to the next slide, please, if you would.
Okay.
And, okay, my apologies, third slide. Okay, the history of Caterpillar is a quite profound one. It goes back well over 100 years. This company has led the way in earth-moving technology for that amount of time, and it all started in the late 1800s with Benjamin Holt inventing, building his first combine harvester, moving into the early 1890s and building first steam engine tractors, then progressing along towards gasoline-powered track-type vehicles. In the early 1900s, around 1912, C.L. Best Company was a company that was producing the same type of technology as Benjamin Holt was. So these two companies merged together to form what is now Caterpillar Tractor Company in 1925. Next slide, please. All right. Excuse me. In the late 1920s, 1928, Caterpillar really starts making their acquisitions and innovating their technology. So you see in 1928, they acquired Russell Gardner Manufacturing, and they produced their first diesel tractor model in the Caterpillar 60 tractor in 1931. Slide, please. And 1936, as you see, the 1930s were very busy.
Sorry?
They helped to, I'm sorry, had a malfunction there. Okay. They start to span out over to build the Hoover Dam, helping to build the Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge in 36 and 37, as well as manufacturing and producing a matching wagon product line in the 1940s. Next slide. Okay. Now they start to innovate their product lines in the mid-1940s, designing and building custom bulldozer blades to use on their equipment, and also design and building different kinds of scrapers. Now in the late 1940s, you see Caterpillar start to sort of span more globally. As you see, they work on the Bhakra Dam in India. Okay. Opening financial subsidiaries in England in 1950. They worked in Pakistan on the Mangla Dam in 1961, moving into off-highway trucks, bigger vehicles, the 769 model particularly, and moving into working on the Panama Canal in 1962. Okay. In the late 1960s, they decided to move their worldwide headquarters to Peoria, Illinois. And in 1970, a real first for Caterpillar, if you will, their sales outside of the United States actually dominated those inside the United States. So that was unheard of in Caterpillar's history up to 1970. And then in the 1980s, you see them continue to move into Paraguay, Argentina on the Yacyretá Dam. I hope I am pronouncing that right. If I am not, my apologies. And then you see them continue to move forward in the mid-80s with the Ataturk Dam in Turkey. Next slide, please. And the 90s shows no sign of slowing down for Caterpillar. The Three Gorges Dam in China, which is a astronomical feat. This is a very, very large project. 300 Caterpillar machines worked on this, and they continue to move throughout Asia, working on the Kansai International Airport in Japan, and acquiring Perkins engines to the line of Caterpillar products.
For what it's worth, I've been at the Three Gorges Dam, and it's everything you said. It is an absolute amazing feat, just an amazing construction project. It is huge. You can only understand it when you see it firsthand.
From what I gather, it makes the Hoover Dam look tiny.
No, it's as a matter of fact, people often talk about the Hoover Dam and the Three Gorges Dam as being in the same ballpark. Those are the two big ones in the world, but this one has more power generating capacity just because it's newer.
Okay. Well, in the 2000s, we see Caterpillar make another huge acquisition in the Progress Rail Services, and they continue to expand their empire throughout Asia as well, working in the Korean Peninsula and on the Saemangeum seawall. And they announced in 2008 their first electric drive tractor prototype. They complete the acquisition, continue acquiring companies in China, the Shandong SEM Machinery Company, acquires Electromotor Diesel, the Walterberg AB, which is what was a company in the field of mechanically and electrically driven propulsion systems, and has a specialty in marine controls for ships. So Caterpillar really worked on their ability to transport their products throughout the world, making it easier, kind of cutting out the middleman. That way they didn't have to spend money. They owned all of it. So it was really a really key move for Caterpillar. And you can, next slide.
Oh.
These are some of Caterpillar's early products and services that they offered. A few more pictures. We move into some of their smaller machinery, bulldozers, forklifts, so on and so forth, diesel engines. Next slide. Now we move into the CAT Financial subsidiary. The whole idea of the CAT Financial subsidiary is to cover whatever you as the customer needs. So whether you are looking to purchase, protect what you've already purchased, manage that with assistance or lines of credit or whatever the case may be, and even resell, release what you have, whatever the case may be, Caterpillar has you covered through their financial subsidiary.
Next, we looked at the mission of the company, and obviously we did not look at their mission statement. We really looked at the true mission of the company, and we utilized Abel's model to do this. This is a three-dimensional business definition model that helps the company define its business. Here we're looking at who is being satisfied. There's the customer groups, what is being satisfied, the customer's needs, and how are the customer's needs being met. Those are three areas we looked at. Next slide. The segment or sided market, the largest markets for Caterpillar is the construction contractors and the mining firms. Next slide, please. The groups being satisfied, the metal mining industry, construction industry, the other mining industries, the construction services industry, the industrial machinery industry, coal mining industry, the oil and gas production industry, the oil well services and equipment industry, the railroad industry, and marine transportation industry. And the marine transportation is primarily the diesel engines, the high-speed diesel engines. The unmet or unsatisfied needs, they provide high-quality and dependable equipment and products. These products are capable of operating in all terrains and environments, even including extreme conditions. They have very minimal downtime, which is critical to the companies. They have massive generating capabilities for customers in their operations where they operate in areas where normal utilities are not available. They have innovative technology that improves the efficiency and safety for the companies. An example of this is an automated GPS equipment truck or excavator. They have massive production capabilities and distribution channels to meet the demands in a timely and efficient manner. You're going to hear more about that a little bit later when we talk about the strategy used for the global products. They also, as just for reference, they have the financing to support the sales and rentals. These pieces of equipment are very expensive. Many companies may not be able to afford them without the financing to back it. Satisfying the unmet needs. They provide design engineering, metallurgy of steel and steel fabrication, diesel engine design and engineering, strong system of distributors with abilities to assemble and sell vehicular equipment. This is really important. A lot of this equipment is too big to ship around the world, so it has to be assembled within the dealers. So when you see these dealers, you're talking about huge dealerships. This is not just a small store sitting there with some parts in it. They actually have to put these machines together at the dealership. And that is a critical part of their strategy to get the stuff there in a timely manner. One of the more notable competencies is they're expert in the end-use industry, especially for construction, mining, and heavy-duty mobile power generation. They have a lot of knowledge in these industries, which gives them an advantage to meeting the needs. They also have the financial condition to withstand extreme industry, especially the market cyclicality. They are financially stable, and they have been through some rough times and came back very strong, and that's certainly an advantage for them. Their international marketing expertise and also their government relations. And they have a law department that handles all the permitting regulations, especially for the large-scale construction projects and mining. They're very familiar with each country and what's required.
Yeah, Scotty mentioned these as characteristics of Caterpillar. But when we talk about distinctive competences that are required to satisfy unmet needs, this is sort of the scorecard in order for a company to be able to satisfy those unmet needs. That is, to have distinctive competence and to be a successful competitor. This is the way we judge the expertise of rivals. And I guess what Scotty's telling us is that Caterpillar is in good shape in all of these benchmarks.
That is correct. They are still the leader. And of course, the vision going forward, Caterpillar certainly has the desire and the capability to be recognized as a leader for making the world a better place by designing, manufacturing, and delivering the most innovative, reliable, and environmental friendly equipment and technology. And this stuff will support the customers and create economic growth through construction and energy development on a global level.
All right, so we go into our environmental assessment and we look at the economics. You can go ahead, there you go, Professor Ron. All right, so Caterpillar is going to operate mainly in 4 sectors: the construction industry, which is going to include commercial and residential, mining, petroleum resources, and financial services. Across these sectors, they're the world's leading manufacturer of construction and mining equipment, diesel, natural gas engines, industrial gas turbines, and diesel locomotives. You can go to the next slide. All right, so this is a revenue by country for 2018. A couple of things to notice on this slide is the top number, the United States. You can see that the vast majority of the revenue is coming from the United States at this time. That 1.4% change, that's kind of a difference, more than a drop. It's not really an indicator, I don't think, of anything going on in the United States. And you see also North America, we have Canada. The other thing, there's 2 other things I'd like to point out on the slide. If you look at the next few top countries, all the way down to Australia, you see a big market in the Asia Pacific area. Brazil, we notice, a huge drop of 35% year over year. And we're going to discuss that a little bit later and go into detail why that's the case. You can go to the next slide. Gross national savings. This is going to be the amount of money that is saved, personal, business, and government in these countries. So we're looking at the amount of money here that these countries would have to spend. We see at the top there is China, and Korea is next, and then India. And we see that India is on an upward tick there at the bottom. We can go to the next slide. GDP, and this is the GDP for the purchasing power parity, which puts it on a level playing field. We see that China is on a huge upward swing there. China is by far has the GDP really going in their favor, followed by the United States and India. Again, India, you can see all three of those slopes on an upward trend, but the slope is greater for India and China. They're both in that growth stage. We can go ahead to the next slide. Now, notice here, though, when you do it per capita, which is including the population, divide that GDP by their population, you see it gets flipped around a little bit. Now, China and India have dropped far down because they have such a great amount of population. The United States is still very strong at the top on this one. You can go to the next slide, please. All right, so here we see inflation, which is going to be our general rise in the cost of goods. We see near the bottom, there's a big group there. Everyone is kind of similar except for the two lines that are near the top that are just look like there's a lot of volatility there. So we're looking at India and we're looking at Brazil. India is an emerging market. India is an emerging economy, developing economy. They have a huge population. As you can see, with their inflation, there has been volatility, but it's going down. So they're starting to gain control of a lot of their things that they have going on there. Brazil is still very volatile. One of the reasons for Brazil being so volatile is just the fact that their country at this point is very volatile. They've had, I think in the past 5 years, they've had 3 presidents. The two before this president had actually been impeached for corruption. I forget the name of the corruption state. It has a very creative name to the sting operation that took everybody down, but it was a lot to do with the Olympics. But a lot of corruption there, a lot of uncertainty. Their president now has tried to swing the country back towards the right, but he's very unpopular, and it looks like the country is really flirting with possibly moving towards a socialist system. With Venezuela right next door, it's just not very conducive to investors right now and just creates a lot of uncertainty.
Right. Brazil will have an election again later this year, and looks like that'll be the 4th in a short span. So very, very risky place to be making large investments, even though in the past it's been attractive. But Brazil's fortunes certainly have changed, not due to the basic economic drivers, but simply due to socio-political drivers.
All right, there we go. So next slide. These are those top countries that where their revenue's at. These are their populations. Very much standing out here is the population of China and India, followed by the United States. And I want to illustrate this a little bit further and tell you why on the next couple of slides. So if you go to the next slide, Professor. This is a snapshot of those 3 top countries, and this is the vast difference between China and India and the United States. So keep that in mind as we look at the next slide. Now, to support that huge population, these are the amount of roadways in China, India, and the United States. Now, many of the roads in China and India are going to be unpaved roads also. Go to the next slide, Professor, if you don't mind. Here's the amount of airports that are supporting those populations in China and India compared to the United States. And again, as you'll see, I have some statistics on another slide or two. Many of these airports that they do have are unpaved, so it's not conducive to handling a lot of freight or transport to help these economies grow. You can proceed. So this slide shows China and India's government expenditures. As you guys can see, China and India have begun to invest in their infrastructure. Their governments are spending money. They have to because of population and because their economies are emerging and growing. I did not include the United States on this because the United States expenditures compared to theirs would still dwarf this. So to just keep it in perspective of what those countries are spending, I just left these two on here. You can go to the next slide and I'll begin to summarize. So currently, just to summarize that, the United States is where most of the revenue is at. Out of the top 3 most populous nations in the world, the U.S., as you guys can see, is very distant third to China. And we also can see that the infrastructure in China and India is not even close to that of the United States. Much of the roadway there is unpaved, like we talked about. Many of the airports are unpaved. The statistics on that, in China, 10% of the airports that they currently have are unpaved. And in India, 37% are unpaved. So although Caterpillar has the majority of their revenue coming from the United States, they have to focus on China and India to support the improvement of the infrastructure. That's going to be necessary for the growth in those nations. You can proceed. All right, so their largest markets currently and in the future are going to be China and the United States. China's in the fastest growing market and has a potential for a lot more growth. A lot of growth there to be had. China is the growth market of the present, but India is the growth market of the future. For long-term growth and market position, they have to have a significant position in India, which they're beginning to establish, even though the economy is only half as large as the U.S. and 40% as large as China. For the time being, as we talked about, Brazil is just not an attractive economy for investment purposes, like construction and mining, due to the uncertainty of the nation's political situation.
So now we'll move into the markets. So Caterpillar currently operates in 3 primary market segments, those segments being the construction industry, the mining industry, which primarily helps customers mine profitably resources such as coal, iron ore, and coal and iron ore. The energy industry, which helps to deliver solutions for the growing needs of energy and transportation. Next slide. So the graph we're currently looking at gives us a graphical view of the global construction market size for construction equipment. As we can see, China, North America, and Europe are expected to remain the 3 largest markets for construction equipment through 2019. The European market, as you can see, remains pretty flat, while there's pretty strong optimism in the North American and China markets. Next slide. What this pie chart does for us is give us a view of the demand for construction equipment by activity. So excavators, as we can see, is the largest global demand, the largest in global equipment in the world, followed by loaders and other construction equipment. Next slide. Now this gives us a global view of mining equipment demand by region. What is very notable about this slide is the fact that the Asia Pacific region, which is what Richard was alluding to earlier, accounts for over half of the demand for global mining equipment compared to all the other regions of the world. Next slide. This pie chart gives us a graphical view of mining activities and their demand for mining equipment. As we can see, metal mining accounts for almost half of the demand for for the demand for mining equipment. So, next slide. What are some of our conclusions from these slides for construction equipment and mining equipment? Significant gains in construction equipment sales in China and India global markets. Projected sales in China and Europe are expected to experience a small decline in sales. Projected sales in North America are expected to increase through 2023. Global sales of excavators are dominating construction equipment market share, and the Asia Pacific market is dominating the demand for mining equipment by more than 50% of sales, while global metal mining demands are the greatest needs for mining equipment. So next slide, we'll take a look at the U.S. And the reason we're going to look at the U.S. because as Richard said earlier, the U.S. is where Caterpillar generates the most revenue. North America is where Caterpillar generates the most net revenue. So what we're looking at here is U.S. demand for mining equipment. As we saw globally, excavators, as we saw globally, is the greatest demand in the U.S. Next slide.
Linda, you said mining equipment. This says earth.
I'm sorry, construction equipment.
Earth moving machinery.
Yeah. Sorry.
Which to some extent is also used in mining.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about here is primarily excavators, right? The stuff
Correct.
that moves a whole lot of dirt.
Yes, sir. I misspoke and said mining equipment instead of construction equipment. And this also holds true in the U.S. for mining equipment, as we saw globally, that metal mining accounted for almost half of the demand for mining equipment. Same holds true here in the U.S., where surface mining and underground mining, which is all a part of metal mining, accounted for the greater demand for mining equipment in the U.S. Next slide. This slide gives us a graphical view of mining production in the U.S. What's interesting here is the decline that we see in mining right at around top of 2016 up to the mid 2017. Most of this decline can be attributed to the tariffs that were imposed on imported steel. So we see that drop, and as a result, there was a higher domestic production, which resulted in higher demand for iron ore. Next slide.
Just to make sure that we have this clear, Linda, what we see rising here are the tariffs, right?
Correct.
And that makes imported metal products, in this case imported steel, more expensive for domestic customers. So the domestic customers start to purchase more from domestic producers than they had in the past because of the costliness of the imported product, right? Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
I got it right. Okay.
All right, so just some conclusions for U.S. mining products. Two basic conclusions are that excavators account for over 50% of earth moving equipment globally, and the same is true in the U.S. Surface mining and underground mining hold the largest share of the U.S. market Next slide. So just from a global view, we wanted to look at Australia, and looking at Australia for one primary reason, and that is because Australia is the largest exporter of iron ore. As we previously said, metal mining accounts for a little less than 0.5% of the demand for mining equipment. Iron ore is the world's largest metal that is mined. 29% of the world's iron ore reserves are in Australia. And Australia exports 81% of its iron ore to China. So next slide, and we'll see how what makes this so important for Caterpillar. Strategically, what makes Australia important for Caterpillar is over the years, we see now the contributions that mining is making to the Australian economy. Between 1950 and 2014, mining now accounts for almost 60% of the Australian economy. Next slide. Yes, sir.
That's a pretty impressive trend right there compared to the others, right?
Correct.
Here we have, on the reverse, we have, if I can copy it real quick. Well, this one goes in the opposite direction anyway. Agriculture, which traditionally has been so strong, now not so strong, and mining is more important. Big change.
Actually, these were the two that Scott was saying didn't come out. So you can go down to the conclusions, Professor Roney.
What do you want me to do?
Come down 2 slides. These were the 2 that Scott was
Oh,
showing you.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so looks like,
Come down to conclusions.
okay. More?
Okay, yeah, right there. So some conclusions we can draw from the Australian mining market is that, like we said, Australia is the world's largest exporter of iron ore. Over time, mining exports have been a significant part of and more valuable to the Australian economy. Mining industry continues to support the overall economic growth in Australia, and which makes Australia very attractive for Caterpillar. And mining industry accounted for 21% of the growth in Australia's GDP in 2018. Next slide. We're going to look at the next few slides, which show some trends in construction spending in the U.S. Again, this is significant in this assessment, primarily because, again, most of Caterpillar's revenues are generated in North America. So the grayed out areas represent recessions in the U.S. As you can see, every time there was a recession, there was a decline in construction spending. Next slide. Same holds true for residential spending. When you narrow it down to residential spending, recession of 2008, 2007, 2008, there was a decline in residential construction spending. Next slide. Again, we see the same trend during periods of recession in new privately owned housing units that were started. The same trend exists. And you'll see some of these trends later on in the financial slides kind of piece themselves in with Caterpillar sales during some of these periods of recession. Next slide. Now, what's interesting about this slide is that as residential spending is declining during periods of recession, interestingly, non-residential spending is increasing. One of the primary reasons here is as housing has taken a hit, we see that healthcare, education, and energy sectors are remaining in flux and still having spending there. Next slide. Again, just another view of housing units that were completed during periods of recession. We see the same trend of decline. Next slide. So some conclusions from U.S. construction spending is that a confluence of factors hit the construction industry, especially during periods of recession.
Yeah.
During the Great Recession of 2008, residential construction experienced a significant decline. However, non-residential experienced an increase. Housing units started and completed were also dealt a tremendous blow during the Great Recession of 2008. While residential housing took a hit, healthcare, education, and energy sectors remained in flux, which contributed to the increase in non-residential construction spending. Next slide. Now, this is Caterpillar's energy industry. One of the biggest and greatest takeaways here is that China, interestingly, accounts for 25% of the world diesel engine demand, while as North America, coincidentally, on the flip side, is at the bottom, demanding only 11%. Next slide. So when we look at this holistically in population trends and what this means for Caterpillar, right? So Richard already spoke a little bit about this, and China and India. We see both populations growing through 2023. However, what's interesting is that India is growing at a faster rate. We see even growing trends in US and Brazil. Same holds true for Germany and Australia. Germany and Australia are growing at 1% and 42% respectively. Chile, Mexico, and Peru are growing at 27, 30, and 32% respectively. So holistically, why are these population trends important for Caterpillar? Next slide, Professor Roney. is more population means more roads, more infrastructure, schools, hospitals, buildings, power supplies. And this all translates into increased sales in construction equipment and in Caterpillar's energy industry.
All right, so let's take a look at some of the cool stuff that Caterpillar offers to take care of some of these problems we've been talking about. Here you see on their construction side, we have a track loader, excavator, and a grader. If you see the next slide, just some of the construction equipment, I won't go through and read bullet by bullet, but you see that they make backhoe, loaders, compactors, telehandlers, skidders, things like that, utility vehicles. You can go to the next slide. Global competitors that they have is Hitachi, Komatsu, Liebherr, Volvo Construction Equipment. All these people are players in that same industries, which we'll see on the next slide as it breaks down the market share. As you can see here, though, Caterpillar's very strong market share. They have 16.4% solid to themselves. We see Komatsu is coming right behind them at 11.9, and Hitachi, Volvo. But as you can see there, they do have a very diversified field of competitors that they are having to deal with. Next slide. Again, mining equipment. You see basically that is a underground mining truck, a drive system, and a rock flow system. On the next slide, you'll see there's two different kind of minings. There's surface and underground. And surface, they have to deal with these companies, Komatsu, John Deere, Volvo, some of the same companies, Sandvik, Liebherr, some of the same usual suspects. On the next slide is the underground, or are the underground competitors, Zhengzhou Mining Machinery, Epiroc, Sandvik. Those are some of the other companies that they have to compete with the underground. Again, I'm not going to go through and read all of these slides. I'll let you guys in the audience read, but you see they have the rotary drills, hydraulic shovels, soil compactors, landfill compactors. Next is, yes, sir.
Very complete line.
Yes, sir, absolutely. They offer anything you need if you want to get in the mining business. Petroleum. You see here a compression engine, a well service pump, and also an offshore generator, which is, of course, when they use those on the offshore oil wells that we see on TV out in the Gulf. If you go to the next slide, they do, and again, same thing as before. You guys can read and see what all they have here. But for example, reciprocating engine power generator sets, turbines, centrifugal gas compressors, and related services. Now looking at the global competitors, you see it's a little bit different there. A little bit different competitors: GE, Siemens, Cummins, Rolls-Royce, a little bit different companies than they have. A lot of them have been the same companies over and over that they've dealt with. But in the petroleum, they have some very specific other ones. Their financial industry, if we go to the next slide, we'll see there what they offer. They offer, kind of like Jared talked about earlier, loans that allow customers and dealers to use the Caterpillar equipment. They offer installment sale contracts, which are equipment loans that enable the customers to purchase the equipment with a down payment or a trade-in. Their global competitors, which you'll see on the next slide, are going to be John Deere, Volvo, Komatsu. These are going to almost any company that you have seen there is going to have some financial division that's going to offer some sort of financing to help their customers to obtain their product. But we also see that Wells Fargo Equipment Finance is a large player in this market also. The financial market is very, very competitive in this industry, in all the industries that they deal with.
Okay, so now we'll look at some of those competitors that Richard just spoke about. Like Richard alluded to, Caterpillar has several competitors, but we'll look at just a few. And those competitors would be Cummins, Deere, T-Rex, Hyster, and two Japanese-based competitors, Kabuto and Komatsu. I think we've all seen those construction equipment somewhere in our lives. But what this slide jumps out from the slide is the fact that when we look at holistically all these competitors, Caterpillar has a significant higher operating margin than its competitors. Another thing that jumps out is the high leverage margin that Caterpillar has at 64%. But again, with the cyclical nature of this industry, 64% is not unheard of. You can see another American-based company, T-Rex, sitting right at 51.9%. Now, Komatsu, interestingly, has a really nice leverage of 28.6%, but again, Caterpillar is not too off base. So to look at these comparisons graphically, the next slide will show the sales comparison of Caterpillar to its competitors. Next slide, please.
Okay, I can't resist the temptation to observe that even though heavy leverage certainly does exist in this industry because of the substantial capital requirements to build new plants, to make adequate inventories of these very heavy machines, and also to finance customers through company-owned finance subsidiaries. 64% of leverage means that when we add long-term debt to shareholders' equity, 64% of that, about 2 parts of capital to our debt, and 1 part, 36%, is equity. And that's getting up to the limit. And I think that this means that Caterpillar may have to be somewhat cautious in the way it pursues strategic opportunities in the future, because let's say that it were to try to make another large acquisition, it would have to borrow money to do that as well, wouldn't it? And that could push leverage up, my heavens, over 75% perhaps. And at some point, it just gets kind of nosebleedy. And therefore, when we see leverage much at this level or much higher, it means that companies have to pull in their horns a little bit until they get some of that debt paid down. And therefore, the suggestion here is that Caterpillar may have to be just a little more cautious in the future until it gets a little more balance between debt and equity.
So as I was saying, this just gives a graphical representation of the sales comparison between Caterpillar and its competitors. Next chart is a side-by-side view of operating income and operating margin with Caterpillar and its competitors, and then the impact of Caterpillar against its competitors really stands out when you see that long yellow line come out, and the long for both operating income and operating margin.
Yeah.
The next slide, again, is just another representation of Caterpillar's operations. As you see, you can see that graph line go up for Caterpillar, way up there, and while Komatsu, Cummins, and Deere are not even near it. And the last...
This is a very effective graphic, Linda. Nice piece of work here.
Thank you. And next slide again shows, as Professor Roney, next slide, yep, where Caterpillar stands out there almost alone at 64% financial leverage, again, which suggests that they should be cautious. And the last slide, one more, gives us the ROI comparison of Caterpillar against its competitors, and Caterpillar sitting out there almost alone at 24.8% leverage.
Leverage, this is ROI, isn't it?
Excuse me, ROI, I'm sorry.
And 18.5% in this industry, as we can see, is pretty good. It's not a standout winner when we see Deere at over 20%. Cummins does not, we can't compare Caterpillar to Cummins because Cummins makes smaller, faster moving product, especially engines. So although it certainly is in this industry, I do think it's fair to compare Caterpillar to Deere. And yes, indeed, Caterpillar is a leader for sure.
All right, so the framework that we're going to use to analyze the company's competitive environment is going to be the Porter's Five Forces model. We're going to look there at the competitive rivalry first. So there's a high competition among the companies that produce the similar equipment. They're global as well as regional rivals. They compete in this industry, and they've developed extensive research and development, and it makes innovation and differentiation key factors. Competition in the financial industry is the greatest because of the extensive lending capabilities of all of those competitors' financial divisions, as well as other lending sources that are available. Threat of new entrants, that's very low in the industry because they involve the heavy equipment and technology. To enter the industries, companies would have to compete with established firms like a Caterpillar, like a Hitachi, like a Komatsu. And they would have to have a lot of access to resources to make that equipment that they don't have right now. They would have to start from scratch. Those companies would have to invest a large amount of money into their research and development and into the manufacturing capabilities to produce comparable equipment to be able to get into this market. You can next slide. Threat of substitutes, again, very, very low. If there was a substitute that used less sophisticated technology, you will be talking about a large amount of human labor, a lot of people with picks and shovels. That's not really going to work out. And if you were talking about using a technology greater than what's out on the market now, again, you'd be talking about a huge investment to get into that market, obtain those resources, obtain the research and development, the intellectual design, and the manufacturing capabilities. So very, very low there.
Yeah, if this was 100 years ago, a substitute in China might have been thousands of coolies, but since we're past that time, it's kind of hard to find a substitute for a piece of Caterpillar equipment except a bigger piece of Caterpillar equipment.
That's right. That's exactly right. Bargaining power of suppliers, I believe, is very low because a large scale of production of heavy equipment, competitors in the industry have to depend on obtaining those resources from a lot of different sources. They're going all around the world to get these different sources. So because of that, and because of their vertical integration strategy that they've used, like buying the railroad companies that we'll talk about a little bit later, it's just very hard for one supplier individually to put pressure on anyone in this industry because they have other options. Bargaining power of the buyers. Now, that's relatively high because buyers include large organizations and government. They're going to be purchasing this heavy equipment for large projects like infrastructure development, some of the dams and things like that we talked about earlier. Because of the large scale of purchasing power and that there is competitive rivalry that exists, they do have the option to go purchase their equipment from Komatsu, from Hitachi, because they do have comparable products. Next slide just basically takes that information and puts it on a summary where you see the numbers there in the bar form. To just do a conclusion on that, the hybrid strategic objective focuses on differentiation and low costs. Competitive rivalry has made it necessary for the competitors in the industry to continuously innovate as well as lower cost. Differentiation across all markets and high quality has set Caterpillar apart from their competitors in some ways. But there's still growth potential with continued focus on quality, innovation, and differentiation.
Right. And one of the points that Rick mentioned is that, in fact, there really still is plenty of rivalry here. And it forces Caterpillar to make a decision. How are they going to conduct this battle? So pretty soon we're going to get into strategy. And the real question that you should be asking yourself if you're in the audience is, if there are plenty of rivals in this industry, and in fact there are, depending on the industry segment, different rivals, how will Caterpillar conduct this rivalry? Will it do so based upon the most economical equipment, the most affordable equipment, or perhaps the alternative, the most superior equipment in terms of performance, or even some combination of the two? And I think this team is probably going to give us the answer. But with rivalry so intense, that's the question. What will be the basis for going to war? How are we going to go to war as one of the rivals in this industry?
All right, so some of the critical success factors that we see here, I'll pick out some very important ones off there. We see the dealer system, making sure they have those dealer networks out there, the research and development, because as you'll see later, they need to make sure they're focused on the innovation, the differentiation that's going on there, and also being able to do those things in a cost-effective manner to make sure that they have comparable prices. Knowledge of industry markets is very important. That's why you see Caterpillar moving into now places like India to go ahead and start gaining an expertise there, gaining a foothold. Metallurgy and customer service are all going to be some of the very important ones you will pull out of there. On the next one, we kind of gave them a critical success factors report card, kind of rated them where we felt like they were. We feel like Caterpillar is obviously kind of head and shoulders above the rest, even though they do have some very competitive rivals out there, but we do feel like they are an A company. And just to put a conclusion on that, we feel like the industry's profit potential is encumbered by high rivalry and buying power of dealers' customers. Through innovation and differentiation, Caterpillar is able to charge higher prices to secure higher profits.
If I can remember, I think I'm going to put at least the top bullet point on the exam. That's a very strong conclusion that you've just drawn. And the second one's not bad. Who's doing capabilities?
I've got it.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel better now.
So Caterpillar actually has a portfolio of over 20 different brands. What we're going to look at next is the how those brands play into Caterpillar's financial performance. So what we're looking at right now is Caterpillar's sales, operating profit margin, return on invested capital, as well as return on equity. One of the interesting things with sales is we see a decline in sales in 2016, right around 2016, and then a subsequent increase in sales right around 2018. 2016, some of what attributed to that decline in sales for Caterpillar was a grim outlook on global mining, drilling, and construction activities, coupled with slower economic growth in China and Brazil's recession. As sales dropped in 2016, we see a corresponding drop in operating profit margin. And as sales increases, we see a corresponding increase in operating profit margin. Now, return on invested capital, which measures gains on investments. For 2018, we see Caterpillar sitting right at around 18.5% is where they closed the year at. With interest rates sitting at about 4 or 5%, Caterpillar gains 13.5 to 14.5%. Not a bad deal for Caterpillar on its return on invested capital. ROE, which measures just how much profit a company can generate from invested money, is again not bad. We look at Caterpillar in 2018, right at around 49%, almost 47% ROI. And in 2019, Caterpillar's projection is to have 38% ROI. Next slide.
A couple of quick comments. First of all, you can see that there's a pretty close similarity in the patterns of sales and operating margin, and even a closer one with ROI. And this is because in this industry, the fixed costs of being in business, of owning and operating all of those factories that Caterpillar has, all those operations, many of their costs are fixed. Whether they produce a lot or a little, they've still got those costs. You know, once you dig a hole in the ground and have a mine, you've got a certain amount of cost. Certainly the factories, you've got fixed costs. So if the sales go down, the fixed costs don't. And the effect is pretty severe on operating margins. What's very much in Caterpillar's, to their credit, is that when the sales did go down so much, the operating profit margin went down, but not nearly as much as I would have expected. You can then see that when sales started to go back up again, those fixed costs got spread over a much larger base. And so they represented a smaller portion of sales, and the operating profit went up so substantially as a percent. And so the operating margins and even rates of return in these very heavy asset-based industries tend to be very volume sensitive. And that's pretty much what we see here. Okay.
Okay, the next slide looks at long-term debt, equity, capital, and leverage. And again, we see long-term debt for Caterpillar. Right around 2016, Caterpillar is starting to work on paying down some of his debt. Consequently, you see Caterpillar's leverage start to come down too, as long-term debt leverage, is a portion of total equity.
Right. Yeah, not of capital.
It's total capital.
Is
total capital
of debt and equity, and
Yeah.
leverage then is the portion of the total represented by debt. And the smiling part of this exhibit is the increase in equity in expected in 2019, gradual increase in 2018. And that's because of expected increases in volume and profit. What makes equity go up is profit. Before we pay dividends or sell more stock or buy stock back. But it all begins with net income. And you can see that Caterpillar is expecting some pretty good net income in 2019 because equity really is expected to shoot up.
So as previously stated, the recession in 2007, construction and mining companies cut back their spending for heavy machinery. However, Caterpillar saw a significant spike in sales in 2011, which was primarily due to a global economic recovery and the increased demand for mining and construction equipment. China is the world's largest market for construction equipment, and Caterpillar's fastest growing market, as well as Australia's demand for mining equipment, were considerable contributors to Caterpillar's sales. As I said before, the grim outlook for global mining, drilling, and construction activities, as well as the slower economic growth in China and Brazil's recession, contributed to the decline in sales in 2016. Next slide. Despite the cyclical nature of Caterpillar's industry, the company has maintained a healthy profit margin over the past 10 years, averaging about 20% operating profit margin. Like other firms in this industry, Caterpillar is highly leveraged, which indicates that it is using more debt than equity to finance growth and investments. Interest rates have been relatively low. However, Caterpillar's rate of return on investment has been rather low, yet still higher than interest rates. In 2018, Caterpillar's rate of return, 18.5%, were much better and much higher than interest rates. Increased demand across end-use markets and cost controls accounted for spikes in sales and profit margins in 2017 and 2018, respectively. So This next slide actually gives us a financial look at Caterpillar's major segments: construction industry, resource industry, energy and transport industry, and its financial products. What's interesting about this slide is that, as we've said before, construction industry is Caterpillar's highest yielding industry as far as sales and revenues. Coincidentally, Caterpillar generates its highest profit margin from its energy and transportation industry. What's also interesting is that even though construction had the highest sales and revenues, energy and transportation generated almost as much profit, if you're looking at it, at 39.38 versus construction at 41.47. Next slide. These are just graphical representations of what we just looked at in the chart, just to give it some more impact. Below, we see construction industry standing out there by itself on the bar. Next chart. For sales, profit margin, which was really interesting. We see now energy transportation industry sitting out there on that bar chart by itself.
All right. Now we have moving into research and development. Caterpillar is centered in a few locations around the world, two primarily here in the States, one in China. The University of Illinois Research Park, which in Champaign, is where their Data Innovation Lab is located. This is a location that utilizes students from the University of Illinois in cross-functional teams to solve everyday and greater problems faced by CAT. The Innovation Lab is known for what they call their sprints, which is essentially groups of students team up and for a couple of months and present these problem-solving techniques to Caterpillar. Caterpillar makes a decision on whether they will use them or not, and they move forward, or they don't, and the students go back to the drawing board, so to speak. They do this as a time management thing for their students, so that the students don't waste whole semesters or even longer working on a project just to have Caterpillar potentially nix it. It's just a way of time management. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Mossville, Illinois is where the primary amount of Caterpillar's research and development is done. This is where product development and their global technology division are. The tech center is focusing on product development that meet emission standards, which is set by the EPA, because we all have to keep the government happy. So they're also focusing on fully autonomous mining equipment and GPS tracking, object detection systems being implemented on their mining equipment to improve their safety of their mining equipment, and also the use of multi-autonomous vehicles being worked to increase efficiency. I can't describe how very interesting this is. One person in this multi-autonomous system has the ability to operate multiple pieces of Caterpillar machinery deep into mines from potentially one location to around the world. So someone in the United States could potentially be operating a machine in China or in California, wherever the case may be. So it is a very, very interesting system. This is, correct me if I'm wrong on my pronunciation again.
Wuxi.
Wuxi, yes. Wuxi, China, which was voted one of the 10 most influential R&D centers by Scientific America. They focus primarily on hydraulic components, operator stations, and powertrains. They're leaning into the Perkins engines that Caterpillar owns, the 400 and 1100 series. They are their primary support chain all throughout China, and they focus on alternative fuels such as biogas, landfill gas, which are their two main top prospects for alternative fuels in China. Next slide, please. Africa is a very interesting territory for Caterpillar. It is not a primary source of research and development. What they are doing is very, very early stages, but Caterpillar sees a great deal of promise in the future of Africa. And the $1 billion that was invested into that continent in 2016 should be indicators of that, of how serious they are about what potential Africa has to offer. In Africa, CAT is using their G3520C generator to power a community in Tanzania using harvested natural gas. The objective of Caterpillar is to power the continent, so to speak, so that they may better pursue a higher quality of life in more remote locations. They want to do this through the increasing of electrification and more sustainability, and they are going to speak with customers and locals to identify market trends and all potential opportunities. This is expenditures of research and development by Caterpillar. This is a quarterly statement from 2011 to 2018. As you can see, is consistently the same with the exception of late in 2014, which will be explained on the following slide, where it had a very, very substantial peak.
But the expenditures have been trending downward.
Downward slightly.
And
Yes,
why do you think this is occurring?
I think they are generally just focusing their attention.
Maybe it's because the operating profit was going down.
Yes.
And if the sales were weak earlier on in this chart, and then operating profit margins a little bit under pressure, then regrettably, some compromises have to be made in the R&D budget.
If the operating margin is decreasing, they're going to be focusing that attention elsewhere.
Sure.
Okay. There we go. That large spike in the fourth quarter of 2014 was introducing new products and higher incentive compensation expenses. That new product technology was the CAT Connect, which is a way to combine Caterpillar's technologies, technological services, and the hydraulic, hybrid, and advanced powertrain technology. Their larger size excavators and excuse me, larger wheel loaders, which offered a 25% lower fuel consumption than previous models did. So they're looking to increase their fuel efficiency.
Next, we'll look at some of the functions and skills of Caterpillar. We're going to go through these slides. There's 6 of them. We'll go through fairly quickly because there's a lot of material in each one that you can read a little bit later. We'll just hit the highlights. If you look at this particular slide, you'll notice that Caterpillar has over 500 worldwide manufacturing facilities combined with all their other facilities, marketing, logistics, research and development, dealerships, and things like that. That is huge and is a big part of their global strategy. Also, if you look here, we've heard a lot about Brazil not being a really good market currently to be investing in, but Caterpillar had previously invested quite a bit there. And in doing so, they're now manufacturing over 250 different products in the Brazil area. Some of that includes the hydraulic excavators, the track-type tractors, motor graders, generators, solar turbines, things like that. So it's still a big part of their distribution system, even though it's not quite as much.
The nice thing about most of Caterpillar's equipment is that it's global in nature. So if Caterpillar has factories in Brazil, but the Brazilian market is weak, or even the regional South American market is weak, it's possible to sell the production or to ship the production to other parts of the world. Granted, the freight expenses are significant, but that's one of the nice things about being in a global industry.
On this slide, if you take a look at China, we've talked a lot about China and its potential for Caterpillar. As you can see, they already have quite a bit of investment in China. Most of the equipment there is related to construction and mining their facilities, such as hydraulic excavators, track-type tractors, etc. This is huge for Caterpillar, and there's, I guess the growth here is even going to be greater as they go. They are looking at doing some additional investment there, but at this time, I don't see a lot of it going on based on the current economy. If you look at the next slide, a couple surprises here is Italy and Mexico. Did not expect that kind of representation. Mexico, Cat Financial Products and Solar Turbines are the big things for Caterpillar at that location. Italy mostly has parts and components facilities located there. On the next slide, as you can see from all of these countries, there's no real massive number of facilities in any one country, but as you can see, this does support the company's global product strategy, their ability to do their distribution and manufacturing. Again, it goes back to they're doing an international business on a local level. On the next one, United Kingdom, this is one of the biggest footprints. In 2011, CAT invested heavily into building construction products here. Part of that's contributed to UK's largest subcontractors, suppliers of precision machine fabricated components, which is the company Cabby. They are a big part of Caterpillar's supply chain, so it was very convenient to locate there in terms of production capabilities and distribution capabilities. Next slide. We've already talked about so much revenue from the United States. Obviously, Caterpillar has a great representation with over 60 facilities in the United States. And of course, the corporate office is located in Peoria, Illinois. You see a lot of facilities located close by there. And in a few minutes, we'll see some more investment going on in that same area. The organizational structure of Caterpillar is a little unique. As you can see going across the chart, it has 7 primary groups. But if you really look at this, it's almost like a matrix when you get into some of the reporting capabilities. We'll talk about that in just a second. But these 7 groups are representative of the strategic business units, and then the other part will be the administrative and support functions. And one key note here, as we'll see in just a second, is that the finance part, the group services, is split just a little bit because one of those is actually a products division, which does fall into the strategic business unit side. The remainder falls into the administrative and support functions. Here you can see the division of the groups. The groups with profit and loss responsibilities. It's the construction industries, the resource industries, which is primarily mining, energy and transportation, and then the financial products group underneath the corporate services group. All of those are charged with profit and loss responsibility, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that decision-making process falls in just a moment. The other 4 groups fall under the administrative and support function. The next 2 slides really just break out the groups into a little bit more with the different units or division within each of the groups, and you can see that and read that a little bit later. Just gives you a little bit more information on what falls under each of the individual groups. Excuse me. Here we can see that Caterpillar structure is really complex. Just looking at it, it certainly has, like I said before, the matrix appearance. And there is some aspects of it that probably could fall into that category. There is some cross-divisional reporting, and there also is some competition between internal resources that they have to compete for as well. The business units have to compete for those internal resources. However, Caterpillar is operating under a global products group structure, and that is very clear if you look at all of their information they put out, all of their structure. Everything refers to the groups, which is headed up either by, they call it a group leader, or they define it as a president for each group. And each group underneath the divisions has several vice presidents. Each group leader, including both the strategic business units and support divisions, report directly to the CEO. The intent of the structure was to provide greater responsibility and accountability for each of the group leaders. Restructuring, most of you are probably familiar with this. If you've done any literature review, Caterpillar is infamous for their restructuring. For years and years, they were very profitable until around 1982 when they saw their first annual loss. They realized they had to make some changes. The change in profitability came about as the company was beginning to lose its touch with the markets the consumer needs. And this was basically because of their centralized decision-making process. This competency did open the door for some new entrants who came in, creating some intense competition and rivalry, and therefore we did see Caterpillar's need for restructuring. Around 1990 was a critical point for the company. This is when they began decentralizing their decision-making process, and it went all the way down to the division unit leaders. The goal setting and performance measures were maintained at the corporate level, but it was up to the different strategic business units to decide how to meet those criteria for the goals and the performance measures. The decentralized process was supported by incentives and accountability along with bonuses. The key was that in this case, with the decentralization, was that the incentives and bonuses were based on the actual business unit's performance, not the corporate overall structure. It's put a lot more pressure on the individual business units to be profitable. This change in strategy shifted the focus from the internal processes to actually meeting the customer's needs and increasing customer satisfaction and, of course, profitability. Additional restructuring will be discussed later. Much of that restructuring was done to develop leadership knowledge and skills in support of the company's horizontal thinking strategy. One of the strategies Caterpillar uses is to move managers or presidents, group presidents, from one group to another so they learn the entire company as well as become more knowledgeable of the entire industry that they support. If you want to ask, did the restructuring work? Well, they went from the losses back in the 1980s to $6.15 billion in net income in 2018. So obviously it was a very smart move on their part to decentralize their decision making.
Good. Who's going to talk?
So now we'll look at Caterpillar's goals. So first we'll look at the goals hierarchy. This is basically a prioritization tool that's used to identify where priorities should be placed when setting goals for Caterpillar. So at the first level, we start at the bottom and we go up. At the first level is acceptable risk. So the question is does Caterpillar have acceptable risk? So one of those things we saw earlier was Caterpillar's leverage. So is it okay? Yes, it is for the industry, but we'll also see further down, a couple of slides down, where Caterpillar's projections are to get that leverage down to as low as 36% by 2023. So we move now to the next rung, which is favorable market position, superior financial results. So does Caterpillar have superior financial results? The answer is they have okay financial results. We looked at 2018 where Caterpillar did $54 billion in sales, had a 24% operating profit margin, 18% return on invested capital, as well as a 47.5% return on equity. So we can answer that rung and say Caterpillar's financial results are okay. So then we move up to the next level, which is a favorable market position. So this is where Caterpillar has some opportunities to increase their market shares, especially in Europe and Asia. And we'll look at a market position chart, couple of charts down. Then we move up to long-term growth. So where does Caterpillar sits in its goal setting when it comes to long-term growth? Some opportunities Caterpillar has there is to diversify their acquisitions in related industries. For example, agriculture, forestry, railroad equipment. Those are some opportunities, long-term growth opportunities that Caterpillar could have. Next slide.
Okay, just a sort of a quick clarifying comment, but I think Linda covered this slide well. Yeah, the fact that Caterpillar is at long-term growth or favorable market position on this hierarchy certainly doesn't mean that it disregards goals at other levels. So no doubt about it, even though Caterpillar is pursuing more favorable market positions in several market segments, that doesn't mean that it's not going to try to improve its leverage and get its risk in a more satisfactory position, or that it's not going to try to improve its financial results. But all things considered, Caterpillar's okay insofar as its risk and financial results. So the place for Caterpillar's management to put the greatest emphasis, the greatest priority, is on improving its market positions where those positions need to be improved. And we've seen a couple suggestions here. Now, the question of acquisitions and to related industries, these are two things that sort of go, hand in hand, if, but, as to the extent that Caterpillar has high leverage, it's going to have to pursue that long-term growth objective carefully, or not as rapidly as it will be able to when it's achieved that more satisfactory leverage. And in the meantime, the red star, the one that stands out the most, is improving the market position, essentially getting larger market shares in its most favorable market segments. Okay.
You can skip that one. That was one that should have come out.
Oh, okay. Got some pretty good stuff here, though.
Okay, so this is Caterpillar's market position goals. Currently in North America, in their construction machinery industry, in North America, Caterpillar currently has about 55% of the market of North America. We think they should shoot for at least 65%. In Europe, they're right now at a moderate state in Europe and Asia, and there are strong opportunities, which I'll mention a couple of slides down, for Caterpillar to assume and shoot for a stronger presence in those regions. Same holds true in mining. Caterpillar has a substantial 40% of the market in North America and should strive for 55%. They also have a moderate holding in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, and those areas also present opportunities for Caterpillars to get a strong presence out there.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So we're looking at Caterpillar's projections through 2023. So through 2023, we see Caterpillar is expecting its sales to grow up to 67 billion, operating profit margin to, and these are all value line trends, operating profit margin to pretty much hold at 23% thereabouts. Return on invested capital, value line is saying they projected to be at 14.5% and ROE at 21.5%. So the dotted red lines that you see for a better standard of success for Caterpillar, we think that Caterpillar should hold or strive to hold its return on invested capital right at around 23%, right at around 18% instead of reducing it to 14.5%. Return on equity, value line is saying, projecting that to be 21.5%. We think Caterpillar should hold its return on equity at around 30% for a stronger standard for success.
Yeah, Value Line is a service to investors. Value Line wants investors to know that these rates of return, where they've been recently, are going to be hard to hold in a competitive industry. But if we're setting goals as standards for success, we're not trying to satisfy securities analysts. We're trying to satisfy our shareholders and our own aspirations to be superior in our industry. And a return on invested capital much below 20% is you know, it could be okay. We've been at 18%. We've come up to 18%. Compared to rivals, we might, if we're 15 or 16, we're probably still okay. But in terms of standards for success, reducing rate of return is probably not something we want to brag to our shareholders about. On the other hand, the rate of return on equity, remember, shareholders' equity got kind of low for Caterpillar. And there are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is dividends and stock buybacks. So, you know, we've had return on equity, which means the growth rate of equity when net income is added to equity at the beginning of the year. You know, we're not going to hold 50% rates of return on equity. But, you know, 30% we should be able to do even as equity continues to build.
Okay, so long-term projections for long-term debt for Caterpillar is, we see Caterpillar's long-term debt coming down to around 22 billion. Equity grows to about 38 billion, and capital also increases at about 60 billion. With that said, this is what I was alluding to. We see the acceptable risk that we saw in the goals hierarchy. We see that leverage now comes down. Caterpillar reduces its long-term debt as a proportion of capital, and now leverage is projected to sit at about 36.5%, which is a comfortable point at which Caterpillar, as Dr. Roney was saying earlier, can now start looking at some of those long-term growth opportunities.
Good point.
So, strategic objectives for Caterpillar. Caterpillar's sales increased by 23%, which is $12.5 billion. Operating profit margin should hold at 23%. Return on invested capital holds at 18%. Return on equity reduces by 17.5 percentage points to 30%. Long-term debt is paid down by 22 billion, paid down to 22 billion, which is a decrease of $3 billion and a decrease of 12%. Equity increases by $24.2 billion, which is really significant. It's a 172% increase in equity at 38.3 billion, and leverage is paid down by 27.5 percentage points to 36.5%.
Okay.
Now, are these goals? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say some of what makes these goals achievable for Caterpillar is in 3 emerging markets, Africa and Middle East, which have nearly 300 construction projects valued at over $50 million right now. India is currently laying 9.5 kilometers of track every single day. That's an opportunity to reach these objectives. And China, by the year 2020, is expected to build 60 new airports.
Wow, 60 airports.
Correct.
Jeez. That'll make it easier for me to use my visa. My visa lasts for another 7 years to go to China. I'm a very lucky guy. I can go to China without having to go through a whole lot of rigmarole. So now that you've told me that I've got all those airports to go to, I'll just have to go try them out.
Watch out for the unpaved ones here until they get those built. All right, so let's talk about their strategy. We looked at the Porter's generic business strategy, and we're going to be talking about the low-cost differentiation. So if we see on the next slide, Caterpillar operates in several different industries, and in each of those industries, they offer different products. So innovation and superior quality are very, very important to them. The differentiation part is primary. That enables them to have high prices and higher profit margins. But They have to maintain efficiency and maintain their ability to control their costs, because they want to make sure that their prices are comparable and competitive to their rivals in that industry that they're operating in. If we look next at the growth matrix, and we break that down, of course, we'll start with the market penetration, and we'll look and we see they want to keep on building their dealer system network in each of those major countries that they operate in, and treating those relationships as strategic partnerships. They want to focus on their social media marketing to promote their Caterpillar's new technology. Now, what I mean there is they've recognized that the demographics are changing, so they're changing their advertising a little bit. They don't have to convince anyone that they make a superior bulldozer or extractor. What they're trying to promote now is a lot of their new technology that they have built into these things, a lot of the safety fixtures, the GPS functions, and things like that. And also, they want to make sure they're providing excellent customer service. They're doing the customer relationship management and doing that relationship building with their clients and with their host nations, in all honesty, to make sure that they are in good, because they are a global company. They continue to offer innovative new products like remote controlled operations of construction mining equipment. It's safer for workers if they're able to go into a mine and operate something without a human driver in it, without a human worker. Personnel recognizing safety equipment. When you have these big machines that are on a construction site, they now have technology that can recognize humans that are in the vicinity to take whatever safety precautions they need. They're looking at electric powered equipment and equipment with increased fuel efficiency. And also the 3D grade control is something that they're really looking at and, quite frankly, getting good at. Basically, they can map it out where they want to dig, and they're not depending on a human. Well, they're really not risking the human error. They're telling it where they want to dig, how deep, how far, and this is able to do this to a more exact level than a human operator could. Market development, they're focused on, and this literally is information that Linda just went over. They're looking into India and China because of that railways and because of the airports that they're looking at. She mentioned Africa and the Middle East, how there is a big push there. They have the construction products in progress there. Diversification, they have historically diversified from the beginnings. When we talked about the history up front, they initially just started out making that construction equipment, but now, and across all industries, the mining, petroleum, financial, railroad equipment, they are diversifying. And this expansion has been driven by that continuous innovation from their research and development investments that they made. Now, also very important are their acquisitions. And these things have been sprinkled throughout our presentation where we've talked about these different industries. These are some of the major ones over, I'd say, the last decade. Pyroban Group is a fire and explosion solution company that they purchased. Bucharest International. Did I pronounce that right, Professor?
Bucyrus.
Bucyrus, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's in Cleveland.
Right. So that's surface and underground mining equipment. The UIT, Underground Imaging Technologies, and that's the geophysical services. They do the 3D underground imaging to help them do that grading that we just discussed, the 3D grading. And also Progress Rail. They bought the railroad and transit products and services. They bought that to get into that industry, but that's also helped them with their vertical integration to help them to move products around, to move resources around, to, again, cut that dependence on outside sources.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Can we take a break just a minute, and let me see if I can even get this to, we will pause. Okay, we're on again. And here we are.
All right, so I'll point out just a few things on the BCG matrix. You'll see, obviously, that down in our cash cow section, we have the United States there. One of our stars is China. And, of course, one of our question marks is going to be India over there, because we know that they're an emerging market. We know they have a huge population, and a huge need for infrastructure, but we also know that there are some difficulties entering there. So we have to see how that plays out. On our BCG matrix, where we're discussing products and services, we're going to see in the cash cow on the next slide. We'll see, of course, their construction equipment is going to be one of their big cash cows there. Mining and petroleum and the dealer network is going to be moving up into the star area. And of course, over in our question marks are going to be some of their newer technology, some of their electric engines, their GPS remote technology. Those things are things they're betting on, that they believe are going to take off and become stars one day, but the verdict is still out on that. And when we look at their international business strategy, so they have a global strategy. Caterpillar makes decisions from their headquarters in the U.S., but their foreign operations are able to make decentralized decisions where they're needed. They homogenize products and services to leverage economies of scale, allowing them to minimize cost and boost their profit and revenue.
Next slide. One more, please. Obviously, strategies are no good if they're not implemented, so we'll talk about the implementation of strategies. CAT's initial growth was primarily attributed to their strategy to compete as a local company in a foreign market, which we previously discussed. This was implemented by building their manufacturing plants and dealerships in regions where product services were in high demand. Next slide. Some of their growth levers were just-in-time inventory, factory automation, product quality. Decentralized decision-making became a great impact on them. Over 300 machines in their product mix, and they also have a solid foundation for growth. Some of the projects and programs they're currently working on is digital sustainability, which they call their digital DNA, which is combining diesel, data, and digital expertise. Just to give you an example, that they were able to build a road in 1/2 the time previously taken without sacrificing any quality and while reducing costs, because obviously they reduced fuel costs, labor costs, everything. That's just one example. The autonomous equipment, which is being achieved through research and development partnerships, and one good example was Newmont Mining. They now have very minimal downtime. MineStar, which is their integrated enterprise system, this takes advantage of partnerships again as well. What this does is allow them to operate all that equipment you've heard about remotely. It can be done from a central control center. This is the infrastructure network that runs that technology. The metal additive manufacturing, which we primarily know as 3D printing, this provides the innovative capability for combining multiple parts into one. Normally these parts are lighter, so this increases efficiency. It also improves downtime by reducing it. And probably more importantly is it allows them to do the part manufacturing on a local level. The expanded production and implementation of distributed power generation systems. This is being done to meet the expected increase in global demand for energy, especially clean energy. They're putting more money into their bio-powered engines. This is to create energy and run equipment while reducing carbon emissions as well as other environmental benefits. They're expanding their Chicago office. The primary reason for this is to expand their digital capabilities. Most of their hires there will be related to digital capabilities, including software developers, data analysts, telecommunicator experts, computer engineers, your high-end technology folks. They're also expanding the Indiana diesel plant engine, our diesel engine plant. This is a $74 million project. Again, the idea is to improve their technology, and all of this is geared toward the autonomous equipment and the technology to run all of that. And some of it is in the communication side to be able to run communication systems remotely to get real-time data. Also continue to market research, as we talked about earlier, in markets such as China, India, Africa, US, and potentially Brazil. I'm sure they'll keep monitoring that one as well. In order to put all this new technology into place, it's going to require some new skills, some folks with some different skills. As I've already stated, they need some software developers, data analysts, telecommunication experts, etc. But they also need some environmental scientists, biodiesel, natural gas experts, legal advisors that's familiar with the laws and regulations for operations in other countries. They're going to need marketing personnel with cyber communication applications and capabilities. and they're business unit leaders with local, regional, and national knowledge of the customer needs, as well as the comprehensive knowledge of the company's capabilities to provide flexible strategies that would be needed to ward off the competitors. And an example of that would be in Canada, and I forgot the particular project, but they were competing for that project, and John Deere came in at a much lower price. So in order to stay competitive at the business level, they were able to work out a lease proposition that ended up getting that contract in lieu of John Deere. That's an example of the decentralized decision making that really paid off for the company. Leadership requirements, more restructuring was needed as they go into the future. So on March the 1st of this year, they actually made some additional changes. You can see those on the screen. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but there were several presidents and vice presidents that were moved around. A couple of people were promoted into new positions. More importantly, you'll skip the next slide, Professor, and go to the next one. Skip this one, go to the next one. More importantly, is they created 2 new divisions, the Oil, Gas, Marine Division, and that's part of the financial services. They also created the Electric Power Division. They're putting a lot of effort into these 2 new divisions for future growth. Leadership, an important move that was made is the CEO was promoted to the president of the board of directors back in December of 2018. As you see, this is a fairly recent promotion. This was a pretty smart move. This should carry the company over the next 5 to 10 years. The CEO has over 30 years experience with the company. He has a lot of knowledge and experience in the foreign markets, especially related to China, India, Asia, Africa, and Europe, which is where the growth opportunities are. So I thought this was a pretty clever move on their part. He also comes from a background of engineering, so he has the technology background to support all of the technology being developed. They do have multiple vice presidents that may be capable of succeeding him in the future, and part of that's because they are doing the horizontal training across the organization.
That's the last slide?
Yes, sir.
Wow. Okay. I just want to tell you, first of all, I'm sorry that I interrupted you a few minutes ago, because if I hadn't, you would have finished right at almost perfect time. I'm going to stop this recording pretty quickly, and then we can continue our conversation. But I do want to record that I think you guys did a smashing job. I forget what the total number of slides was. You had me really scared. It was something like 160 slides. So you guys covered one whole lot of information here. Caterpillar is a fascinating company, but it's a very large, complex corporation. And so it takes a large, complex effort to describe it, let alone to describe it strategically. So guys did a great job. Now, let me see if I can stop this sharing this recording.